Have you ever wanted an inside look at another nonprofit? What are they doing that works? What challenges do they face? What's their strategy? Well, today we're going to do time on the inside with UNICEF USA. So I worked with UNICEF USA in early 2022 to create a custom competency model with them. And now I've asked them to join me and share their honest opinion after 6 months with the model. Let's dive in. It's learning for good. All right, I am so excited. I have Kristi Burnham, Vice President for Professional Learning and Leadership Development from UNICEF USA, here with me today, and I can't wait to dive in and talk about their custom competency model. Welcome, Kristi.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I know so many people are going to want to hear about your process and your journey to create this custom competency model and how it's going. It's always good to have that inside look at what other nonprofits are doing. But before we dive in, I love to start with a question just to give us a little bit of background about you. So could you tell us a little bit about your career journey and what you're doing?
Sure. Well, I graduated a long time ago from the University of Georgia with a degree in advertising, and soon after realized that I wanted to spend my time and energy in places for good. So I've been in nonprofit my whole career, and mostly in grassroots mobilization, volunteers, things like that. And I came to UNICEF USA in 1999, about 23 years ago, in those roles: grassroots mobilization, volunteer management, created volunteer programs, and all kinds of club models for high school kids, all kinds of things, and eventually created a fellowship program that invested in young people to mobilize their communities, and in return, we invested in their professional development. And that led me to the learning role I have now at UNICEF USA. Now I've had for about almost 6 years at UNICEF USA in learning and development, and so now I'm inwardly focused on professional learning and leadership development for UNICEF USA and their staff, and help them be better at their jobs. And so it turns out that that's my life's work, my life's passion. I love it so much, and I'm so happy to have this role at UNICEF USA. And because we have a huge culture of learning, it's very, very easy and fun to do my job and do all the aspects of it.
That's great. I feel like so many people that I meet have sort of fallen into the learning and development space and fallen in love with it in the process. So it's good to hear the different journeys that people take and how they get to where they are, because you really bring so much different experience and expertise based on all those different areas that you worked in. So thinking through how you mobilize volunteers, that can still influence how you look at learning, and how
Absolutely.
you want that staff culture to feel and things like that. So I love to hear how people ended up in the field and what they're focused on now. So I know that creating a custom competency model was something that you were focused on earlier this year. And so I just want to run through a few questions with you to better understand what that process was like and what you're doing now. I just kind of want to hear your honest opinion after
Sure.
having this model in place for several months. So what prompted you in the first place, right? What prompted you to create a custom competency model? Was there something that was driving that particular project or a need that you all had?
Well, yes and yes. So when we all went remote in the pandemic, we shifted to how we support our staff and our learning, and it's particularly our people managers, and wanted to be sure that we were helping our people managers support their teams as much as possible. And so we did a couple of live learning sessions for managers through Zoom, and realized at that time that the content we were delivering was great, but people really wanted to practice the things that they were learning. So we pivoted and we created peer learning circles for managers to workshop their own issues with an external coach, all over Zoom as well. Our leadership here at UNICEF USA was continuing to say, we need to give more. We need to give more to our managers and more to our staff. And so I created this comprehensive learning strategy that included lots of different elements, both for individual contributors and for people managers. And it includes our use of the Clifton Strengths model. It includes coaching, external coaching. It includes all various aspects, but there were also specific elements for our people managers. And that's when we realized, how can we expect people to behave the way we want them to if we don't outline for them what those behaviors are? And so that's the need for creating the competency model, the customized competency model that reflects our community and the vision that we want to see in our values.
That's great. And I love that kind of this new hybrid, remote and now hybrid model is part of what drove that process. And then as you got deeper with certain steps, right, you were starting to realize that maybe that foundational step needs to be there as well. And also peer learning circles, we just need to bookmark that, because I feel like that is an episode all on its own. And
Okay.
I'm sure so many organizations would love to hear what you're doing with peer learning circles.
Great.
How they work, who gets to attend, what the topics are like, all of that. I think people would love to hear more about that. It's such a great concept to allow managers to learn from each other, and then to have that coach in there as well. But competency model today, so let's try to, I'm going to try to keep myself focused instead of getting excited. So what, I know you created this model earlier this year. What was that process like for you?
Well, I mean, it's kind of an unbelievable story in that, Heather, you reached out to me on LinkedIn, cold called, and right at the time that we were talking about building this competency model. And usually I disregard some of those messages. And your message to me was like, this is what I do. This is one of the things I can do. I work with nonprofits to be greater. And I have one other person on my team, and I reached out to her and said, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Is this serendipitous, or am I good? And so you and I met, and that is how I found you, and what a good fortune it was for me, because you had the expertise and the experience of developing this before, where it is not something that I had done before. I have done a lot of things, but I had not developed a competency model. So when you and I started working together, after having met a couple of times, you drove that process, which I was so appreciative for. You created the timeline, you created the accountability and the responsibility, and you also involved a lot of people in that process. We had focus groups, we had discussions with our leadership. You did a lot of external research, which was, what is best in class for the industry, and all of that was, you kept us driving forward. And it was a very quick process, much quicker than I think you anticipated or I anticipated. But we were able to really gather all that information and create really bold and inclusive behaviors in our competency model that even I was a little bit like, oh, are we sure we want to go that far? But we did, and we got sign off on it. And I'm really, really happy with that model. So the process was great and smooth, and mostly because of you.
Oh, well, thank you. It was not a plug or a setup to,
I know.
to hear about me in the process, but I love that we were able to engage so many people within your organization, doing those focus groups and the interviews, and being able to talk to people and better understand what their experiences were like and what their needs were, or what expectations were of staff, so that we could create something together that really works for your organization. So thank you for sharing that. Now I'm going to ask a couple of questions about implementation, but before I do, and this is not, I didn't warn you about this question, Kristi, but just to kind of give everyone a sense of your model, could you give an example of a competency or a behavior, whatever you're comfortable with, that stands out to you? And it doesn't have to be exact, but is there a competency that you're really excited about, or something that, just to kind of give people a sense of what's in your model?
Yeah, one of the best things that you did for us, you suggested, was to create a one-pager, because the competency model is enormous. It all supports our strategic plan, but there are what we call three major categories, and then there are, under each of the categories, there are three competencies. So for example, one of our categories is deep human connection, and we have three competencies under that: communication and active listening, emotional intelligence, and inclusive mindset. And then under each of those, there are many behaviors by level of the role responsibility. So from coordinator all the way to senior vice president or chief, we have behaviors that we expect to see in each one of those. And those, when you add them all up, that's quite a bit of behaviors that we want to see. The one pager helps us describe what we're really trying to do. Deep human connection was a really bold statement for us in the way that I didn't know if that would resonate with folks, but it absolutely does. And then when you get down into emotional intelligence and inclusive mindset, and the behaviors show up about being an anti-racist organization, or dismantling racism at our organization and or with the rest of the world, those were very bold statements that I wasn't sure we were going to get approved on, and yet we did, because that's the organization that we want to be. So it was really, first of all, thank you for the model of the overview, and then taking it deeper and deeper and deeper, and we wound up with true, like, valuable, meaningful behaviors that people can wrap their heads around and model for each other on an ongoing basis. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it gives people a sense of what's included in your model. And I love that those were approved. And I think one of the reasons is because we were able to hear from people. We were looking at your strategic plan, we were looking at your organization's values, we were listening to people and what they wanted. And then by the time it gets to an approval process, we've had some of that input, we've done some of that research. And so thankfully, that was something that resonated with people. I was going to say one other thing and lost it. So hopefully it's going to come back to me, because there was something else that you said that stood out. I'm going to get it eventually. But while I'm thinking on that, I would love to hear, now that this model is created, it's been approved, I know that is a process in and of itself. How are you starting to introduce this model to your staff?
Yeah. So our fiscal year is July through June, and we were starting to goal set in late summer. And in that goal setting process, we were introducing a new tool on using a new platform, Culture Amp, for goal setting. And we led internal briefings on how to use that goal setting platform, and then incorporated the competencies into the goal setting. So that's how we introduced it at first. We said, okay, we have a whole new set of behaviors we want you to put into your goals, and we are going to rate you on these goals come next year. And then we've done a lot of different relevant ties to the competency models. We had open office hours for people to come in and ask questions about the competencies and how they would be measured and how they would show up. We also have linked it in now our new hire orientation and our onboarding materials. And we also have tied it to the values. We actually rewrote our organizational values, and we had a whole town hall on our organizational values, and tied the competencies, which absolutely support the new and very UNICEF specific values, so that they're continuously repeated over and over. And using our change management model of ADKAR, just continue to reinforce why we're doing this, building the desire. And it's been really well received, because people want to know what's expected of them, and they want to know and managers want to know how to hold their staff accountable. Have we solved everything? Probably not yet, because we're not yet rolling it out and measuring people on it yet. But we've been trying really, intentionally to continue to reinforce, and not just put them on a shelf somewhere and bring them out at the end of the year.
That's great. And you did remind me of what, what I was going to say.
Okay, great.
It's also related to what you just shared. So one of the episodes that is available on competency models is 4 reasons the competencies don't work. And a couple of the reasons are that they're not tailored, which you all were able to do that, right? It's aligned to your organization. And one is that they're not forward looking. And you mentioned that the competencies really describe who you want to be as an organization, not just who you are. And then another one is that they're not used. And so as you were talking, I was able to remember what I was trying to say, because what you're doing is you're embedding them into your existing processes so that they will get used. And so they're going to be a part of those processes that already exist, that staff are already familiar with. And it's just a change to that process in some cases. And so they're going to be more aware of them. I love that you're using the ADKAR model as you're rolling this out. They're going to be more aware of them, and they're more likely to use them and rely on them because of that. So, as you've been rolling out the competencies and staff have been seeing them for the first time, I know you said staff have been excited to kind of see those expectations in writing, but what other responses are you receiving from staff?
Sure. I think the people managers are excited to see them so that they can really help their staff grow and develop in each of these areas. I think the individual contributors are also excited to see them because it's very clear what is expected at each level. Um, just because you possess some of the behaviors and the competencies doesn't necessarily, at a higher level, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be promoted, but it does factor in to what you want to aspire to be. And I think being as clear as possible about what each level is responsible for has been very transparent and very well received. I think that there's also some feedback we've been receiving around exactly what you just said. We're not there yet, but this is who we want to be. And so then the next step for us is how do we get there, whether that's through diversity, racial equity, and belonging courses or live learning sessions and some of these competencies and behaviors like active listening and emotional intelligence. And so for us, I think there's excitement about wanting to see that part too. Now we know what's expected. Now let's learn it and let's grow in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. It can kind of be the foundation for all of the other work that you're doing from a professional development and learning perspective. Now, you mentioned a few of the ways that you're already using the model. Are there other ways that you plan to use it and implement it in the future?
Yeah, one of the things that we want to do, part of that comprehensive learning strategy I talked about is a self-assessment. And so we're going to create self-reflections or self-assessments at each title level that includes those behaviors where a staff person can assess themselves and have conversations with their peers and their supervisor on how and if those behaviors are showing up. And so we haven't created those yet. That's a plan, but that way more and more people will become aware that maybe they think they have something, but they don't, or maybe they don't think they have it, but they do. They are behaving in those ways. So that's very exciting that we've heard a lot of good things about that, and that being a little bit unique to our organization. We also plan to incorporate it into our performance management process. And while we won't rank everyone on every behavior, we will ask how the competencies are showing up and where staff can improve in specific competencies. So the more that we reference them, the more people will have to look at them and go back and reflect on them. So those are two ways in which we plan to use them. And then the third is really we need to figure out where are we lacking and which live learning sessions and synchronous and asynchronous learnings should we offer first in order to achieve the mastery of those competencies and behaviors. So we have a lot of work to do, a lot more work to do that will take much time, but we know at least what direction we're headed in.
Yeah, absolutely. It does allow you to be a little more strategic with the resources that you have as you're creating those live learning sessions, and kind of prioritize where do you want to focus first, because I'm sure you have a lot of plans of ideas and things that you want to do for live learning sessions, but helping to kind of prioritize what are the real needs and how can we meet those important or urgent needs first, can be really helpful when you're sitting in your shoes trying to figure out what the plans are for the year.
Right, right, right.
Great. So my last question to you, so many organizations have competency models. A lot of them are not effective for whatever reason. And some people are, trying to decide if it's worth it, if the competency model is right for them, if they should update or create or buy off the shelf. What would you say to someone who is unsure whether a competency model is right for them?
Well, we had some behaviors that we had, or actually we had some concepts, I should say, that we used before, but they were vague, they were unclear, there were too many per, what does trust mean, what is, that kind of thing. And so I think I would say that it's absolutely worth it if you are going to be specific and be as specific as you can by title or by level or by whatever X factor works for you, because the more that people know what's expected of them, the more you can expect that from them. But how can they behave in the way that you want them to and be good people managers and be good team players and good contributors if you don't tell them what's expected? So it was a relatively small investment relative to some of the other programs that we have to come up with this competency model in a very, quick period of time with a one-page summary. And for us, I've actually shared it with the global community of UNICEF. I work for UNICEF USA. I was talking about the big global community, and they are actually using it as kind of like a reference. They're not going to implement it in the same way because it's not applicable, but they're using it as a reference. And so once you have something great, it can be shared over and over and over again. And then the last thing I'd say is reinforcement, reinforcement, reinforcement. Because if you put it on a shelf, then what's the point? And so that's how if you have the bandwidth to be clear, to be as specific as possible by level or whatever, and reinforce it, then it will make your life easier, better, greater, stronger.
I absolutely agree. One of the things that I heard many years ago and has just stuck with me, especially in my role, is the number one killer of performance is unclear expectations. I don't know what
Absolutely.
that's based on. I'm sure it's somewhere somebody did some research on it, but it has stuck with me. If you don't know what's expected of you, it's hard to perform and meet that expectation. And so having something like the competency model is a great way to be really clear about those expectations. So thank you for sharing today what your process was like, how you all are implementing, what responses you're receiving. I know this is going to be helpful for so many organizations that are thinking about or in the process of creating a competency model, or maybe just in the process of implementing and thinking, how else can we make these relevant? How else can we reinforce that these are the competencies that we want our staff to have? So thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing all of your wisdom and all of your experiences with your competency model.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
It was so good to hear from Kristi. I'm so glad she was able to join me on this episode today to talk about competency models. Now, competency models set the foundation for so many other talent management practices, which you heard Kristi share how they've been implementing and how they're planning to implement in the future. And that includes training. So if you're ready to get clear on what competencies your staff need to be successful, head on over to my website and check out how we might be able to work together. Thanks for watching. It's Learning for Good.